Angular version 17 has introduced a new control flow, and you should not migrate to it. Let's talk about this. So, the new Angular version, everybody's crazy about it. It has got this new cool logo, it has got a really good documentation website which looks like this. I'm a big fan of the changes that came in. I also was able to contribute to this docs as well before even it came out. And I love it because it introduced a lot of cool things, including the tutorial or the embedded tutorials, the web containers that you can work with alongside. This is super, super cool. This also introduced the control flow that we just talked about. So the control flow, let's talk about it, what it is. Previously, we used to use something like ngif, ng for all those directives, and they were pretty nice. But you would also have to learn about why do I have this asterisk right here, and that makes everything difficult. And questions like, if I am using ng switch, do I use the square brackets around the ng switch, or where do I use the asterisk with ng switch default or ng switch case? And that was a bit different from the traditional style of attributes or directives that we usually used. Apart from that, it actually missed a bunch of things. For example, we had if and else conditions using the ngif, but then we didn't have an else if. And that is something that was really, really required. And I've been working with Angular for the past 10 years, and I actually wanted it for quite a long time. Well, now we have this control flow, which has a bunch of things that we call blocks. So the built-in control flow, which is actually built in into the compiler itself, allows us to go through and write these blocks. For example, you can specify an if block using the @sign, and you can say if provided with a condition, and then once you provide the condition, then you can essentially go and render your block. Now this can render elements, that can also render statements. So just as you would write your normal HTML, you can actually do it. You can also say if a is greater than b, render component a, and then you can go forward with else ifs and render component b, and else render component c. This is really helpful because now you can have multiple conditions for this one. And wait, I know some of you engineers, especially the senior ones, would be like, oh, who actually puts these if else conditions if there are too many else if? We would rather use switch case in that case. That's true, but only when you have a certain conditions with certain cases. If you have completely different conditions with completely different, logics, you would still be using else if in this particular case. But we do have the if, the else if, and the else blocks to render conditionally and having a really good control flow. We also have the ability to use the async pipe still within the if blocks. And not only that, we are still able to use all the pipes apart from the async as well, just as we did before. The only thing that has changed now is instead of using the ng if on the particular elements, we are rendering the if block outside. This also solves one of the major problems that we also had in the past, where to put the ngif in this case, because sometimes we were using ng4 and then we also needed to render that conditionally, so we also would want to put an ngif, but we ended with something like having an ng container having the ngif and the actual ng4 in a nested element, which was most of the times whenever I wanted to render something based on some condition. This makes it much easier. And then we also have a for block, which means now I can just have an if block containing my condition, and then I can also have a for block inside it. Now, one of the things that I really, really like about the for block is not only we have this ability to render the items, but now we have the performance gains in place, which means that previously it was optional for us to let Angular know how to track each element. What happens if you edit one of the items? What happens if you delete an item? Should Angular re-render the whole list because it wouldn't know what really happened by default? Then we use something called track by, and we had a track by function, and then in that function we used to tell what was really going on. But now we have the ability to just have track, which is mandatory now, and you should have the particular item to track just by providing this statement. And this makes it so much easier because now we don't have to have a function in our component file, the track by function that is, and we can just specify this statement right here, and it works out of the box. And if you look at it closely, it looks so much like JavaScript. It looks like the for of loop of JavaScript, and the if block looks like the if block in JavaScript. And then also the for block comes with a lot of things like index, count, first, last, just as we had before with ngif statement. What I really like is the empty block as well, because I would use it 90% of the times. I'm rendering a bunch of users. What if the users list is empty? But then I would use the ng if and else condition to actually make that happen. Now we have just the empty block, so you can specify a for loop over an iterable, and once you have that, you can just say empty, and then you can simply have there are no items. This solves a lot of problems. Now I don't have to have the ng if else. I also don't need to have an ng template that would contain what I needed to show when there were empty lists of users or data. This makes it much easier. And then we have the switch block as well. So you can have a condition and you can have a bunch of cases to go along. So essentially, this is what we have for the built-in control flow that replaces ngif, ng-switch, and ng-for primarily. But it's also possible to have more blocks. And when this gets stable, because right now it's in developer preview in v17, once it gets stable, it's going to be much more nicer to also have maybe custom blocks as well and more blocks from the Angular community or the Angular team itself. Now the question is, why should you not migrate to it? And that is the gist of this video. You have to realize that Angular is really famous for enterprise and large scale applications. And just upgrading to a new version is something that in enterprises it's already not so easy, because you have to have a good reasoning for it. You have to give a proposal that gets accepted. Maybe you have a team of chief architects that would actually see if there's a benefit, and then as a team you would also have to analyze, is migrating all of your code base, assuming you have, let's say, 200 components in your project, migrating all of that into the new control flow, is that worth investing the time and money? And trust me when I say this, as someone who's new to the company or someone who's a junior, it gets very intimidating to follow the hype. So when you see there's a new control flow in Angular, it's super cool. It actually gives us a lot of performance benefits. But as cool as it sounds, if we try to migrate everything, that means that we would have to test everything together. We also would have to analyze the time it takes and if it's worth it. So my recommendation is not to migrate completely to the new Angular control flow, but rather start adding the control flow, the built-in control flow for every future component. That is where you'll actually see the benefit of it, because you can then profile those components. Let's say you had an existing component, you create a new version of it or something similar, and then you can actually profile that via Angular DevTools and see how much it affects the change detection. You can also profile it via the Chrome profiler or the Chrome debugger profiler to see how much memory it consumes and other matrices as well. And then you actually see the benefit of it. And trust me when I say this, I love the feature, which means that I will start adding this to my code base, and I'm 100% sure that I'm not going to stop myself from migrating the whole components or the whole application to the new control flow, because you'll fall in love with it. But just having the mindset of starting out with migrating everything is not something I recommend. And that is what you should probably consider as well. This video was a bit different from the videos that I usually have, so let me know how you felt about this one. I also noticed that only about 15% of you have subscribed to the channel who watch my videos, and 85 don't. Come on guys, it's free and it helps the channel grow. It helps spread the free knowledge to maximum people. So do it. And also YouTube thinks that this video that you see right here is going to be useful for you. So watch it, and as always, happy coding. I'm going to see you in the next video.